Page 203 of The Unfolding is the story of Rachael Lampa.
I knew exactly how to be, what to say when I stood in the middle of the stage. I knew exactly what I could do to get validation, to get applause. So the fight was against that. Can I feel whole and loved, of value without that?
God's story has been unfolding.
Since the beginning of time.
He invites you to be a part of it.
Another page in The Unfolding.
Hey, this is Meredith Foster. Have you ever felt tempted to find your sense of self, your source of confidence in something that you do? It works for a season, but it often ends up failing us. Rachael Lampa experienced incredible achievements at a very early age, a recording contract at 14, a first record with multiple number one songs, and that led to tours and television, all the components of success for an artist. She seemed to have it all. Eventually, though, she didn't have peace. So at a time when others her age were just beginning a career, she made the choice to walk away from hers. Today, Rachael is a wife, mom to 2 boys, and if you're a Christian music listener, somebody you likely hear on the radio with songs like Perfectly Loved or Somebody to You. But between the frenzy of touring and putting out records as a teenager and the music that she's sharing today, decades later, there was a season of stepping away, falling back in love with Jesus, and finding identity in Him. This episode's going to sound just a little bit different. It's the very first time we've recorded an interview in front of a live audience, and it was so much fun.
So this is like I've never done this before. So The Unfolding is a podcast that I host.
Okay.
And so every week we ask folks to share a story, a personal faith story, like how God uses hard stuff to transform us and our faith.
Yeah.
But I've never done this live in front of an audience. It's the first time ever, you guys. Yeah. So thank you for being here, and thank you for being willing to share your story on the spot in front of folks. I'm really grateful for that.
Oh, I'm happy to do it. And I, again, this room feels like just a big group of friends. So
I think it is. Thanks, ladies, for making it feel that way. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So I always start off interviews asking, I know a little bit of your story.
Okay.
I've been in Christian radio for 28 years.
Okay.
But I'm sure there are some here who have heard Perfectly Loved and think that's your first song ever.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know the backstory.
Right.
So I would love if you could share what life was like and faith was like for you, like as a kid growing up. What was the context for your family? And
well, I was born in the 1900s. Yeah? Anybody else?
There's a few of us.
So I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, where there wasn't a church on every corner, and the church that was on our corner was a Catholic church. So I grew up Catholic, and it was a beautiful, beautiful place to get to know Jesus, and I got to know prayer and the love of others and discipleship, and I didn't grow up on Christian music at all. Had no idea what it was. So I would get asked to sing, at communion, and I would sing like Whitney Houston and like Mariah Carey, and I'm like, yeah. It's a Christian song about Jesus. It's totally fine. And so that was kind of the beginning of, music for me. But I think if you even rewind further back, I just was la-la-laing all over the house all the time. Every book I read, I would sing it. Every, thing I had to memorize. If I had to memorize something, I would sing it. It was just a very musical household.
You were born to sing.
Maybe.
So your entry into professional singing happened at a really young age. I mean, relative to, this is an unusual story. Not many people. 14? Is that right? Mm-hmm. How did that happen? How did it happen?
So, Boulder, Colorado, I was kind of the singer girl in town. I would get called to do the national anthem or, coffee shops or whatever it was. So there was a coffee shop event after, up in the mountains, and it was after an Amy Grant, Michael W. Smith show. Whoa. Again, I kind of knew who Amy was, didn't know who Michael was, and it was this Christian music festival, basically. And so I was like, I'll sing at the coffee shop. They said, okay, you have to sing Christian music. So I sang the soundtrack to The Preacher's Wife. And I was like, okay, this this checks out for the most part. It was all I could do. And so I walked off stage and it was kind of back in the day where like a record label person would meet you and say, hey, I'm this person from this label. And so that's kind of how it happened.
Wow.
I immediately was like, Mom! And so the whole family kind of came along. We started flying back and forth to Nashville, seeing what this was all about. And so it was the summer of 8th grade. Wow. I know. I have kids, so I'm like, wait, what?
Right.
So summer of 8th grade, I signed my deal, started recording and touring not long after that.
15 years old, right? When your first album came out?
Yeah, my first album. Yep, that's right.
And it wasn't like a slow burn. It was like
It was fast. Yeah.
4 number 1 songs on the first record or something crazy like that.
You would know. You in Wikipedia. I don't remember.
I think that's right. I've read that. And just for perspective, there are many artists who put out multiple projects before they if ever, see a number 1. So you're 15 and just rocketed to stardom. What was that like for a 15-year-old?
I think there were, honestly, like, because it's a podcast and like these things live on, like, honestly, I want to be honest, and I don't remember a lot of it. Like there are some blank spots, of like, it did go so fast that it is a blur at times. And I married a therapist, so that's working out really nicely. Getting some of those things back for better or worse.
That's great.
But I also traveled with my older brother. I traveled a lot with my mom. So I do remember a lot of fun. I did have a lot of fun. I think that part was very preserved and protected for me by the people around me. I had a lot of fun. But you can't ignore the pressure. You can't ignore the expectation. And especially in a place of leadership as a teenager in a place in the faith space, is like, wait, I'm just figuring this out. Like, I don't know, I wasn't this, I also wasn't like this teen star kind of person. I was pretty shy and pretty closed off. And so, at times I'd be on stage and I just was like, I had a lot of imposter syndrome when I was, a teenager. And I think every teenager has that. I think every teenager is trying
adults
on.
Too.
Yeah,
adults
right.
Too.
Exactly. Yeah. We're all trying on these different masks, and it's and I think the beauty of that is that when God enters the picture, He doesn't leave, and He stays at the center, and He stays at the core. And He loves us through those awkward phases, But I definitely had to do that in front of a lot of people. And so after a few years, the best word is burnout. I just could not, I needed to slow the train down. Yeah.
I think about so how old were you about at that time?
When I quit, quit-ish, 21.
So I think about it's hard if you're 45 and you're quitting your job, or you're turning down something which to the world looks like the ultimate oyster, right? You've got everything there before you, and to turn it down, and to be 21,
right,
and to make that decision. What led you to that place?
Yeah, it's wild because that was like when all my friends were graduating, college and moving on, and I was like, oh no, this is backwards. It was probably one of the first scary yet peace-filled things I've ever done. It was one of those things that I knew that a lot of people were telling me, like, that's probably not a good choice. Like, that's like, you're crazy. What are you doing? But I've never had such a deep peace either before that moment. And I just knew that there was a journey ahead that wasn't going to look like the journey that kind of was placed before me. But I did have a knowing, and man, it took a lot to keep remembering that every day. There were days where I was like, what have I done?
I bet.
And there were days I remember like, I didn't had worked my whole, teenage years. So I remember not having money. Like, like for gas. I just remember a friend like sneaking $100 in a journal to me and saying, write all this down. Here's $100. And, you know, I remember these moments where I was just like, what have I done?
Stepping away meant a drastic change in Rachel's life, moving away from something that had been the source of her identity. Could she feel loved? Could she feel valued without the stage and without the spotlight?
Again, I'm so grateful to know Jesus and have known him even when I wasn't trying to ask him for help. Like there was still a peace, like a pulse, you know?
So for perspective, so you've toured and #1 songs, you were on the Tonight Show, just like everything that we would say is successful in our culture. And then I read somewhere, is this true, that when you quit, you became a nanny for a time? Is that right?
I did.
I mean, it's like you're in some ways total opposite now.
Yeah.
It's you and you're caring for others. There's no spotlight and that kind of thing. What was what were your thoughts toward God, or if I could say your relationship with God, like as you went through that discouragement, making that tough decision, and then those days when you're going, wow, did I do the right thing?
Yeah. Very up and down, day by day. I think I was fragile. Like I think God had me in this place where I really, really needed to cling to him because I had zero answers. And I went from having, you know, a calendar for my whole entire year, every city that I would be in, every day off, everything was just laid out, to like just a blank page, you know, and that was really scary for, you know, a 21-year-old. And I think there were times where I felt overwhelmingly grateful for this new freedom. I loved nannying. Like I loved these babies. Like there was so much magic in them. So I was so grateful for that. But at the same time, I wanted to sing too. So I knew that was still inside and over time. So I was a nanny. I started a nonprofit with my family. We work with people, in homelessness and in prisons, found a lot of meaning and purpose and, joy there. And then I started to sing backgrounds for some artists. I sang background for Jordan Sparks, and we toured with the Jonas Brothers and Britney Spears, and had actually, I will say, side note, I had some of the best Bible studies on that tour.
Really?
There was Jesus all over that tour, so that was very cool. But yeah, so it was very up and down. It was like, and kind of not knowing what to say yes to and when to say no, and yeah, a lot of trusting, and then a lot of like my soul trusting and my body kind of lagging behind a little bit, you know, and my brain lagging behind, but like my heart knew that I was going to be okay. I knew that, but of course some days were harder than others.
You know, part of teenage years is like figuring out who we are and identity and all that kind of stuff. And I just think it would be extra challenging to do that in the position that you were in. So I'm just curious if once you unplugged, what was the journey like in figuring out who you are in Jesus?
Oh my gosh. That was the hardest thing. I knew exactly how to be, you know, I knew exactly what to say when I stood in the middle of the stage. I knew exactly, what I could do to get validation and get applause, you know? So the fight was against that, you know, it was like, can I feel whole and loved, and of value even without that? And that was, that's still a journey. That's a daily thing now. But that was the beginning of it for sure. That was the realization that I need to be okay without music at all, even though that was the gift. I heard this awesome thing recently that said sometimes we fall more in love with the gift than we do the giver. And that's what it was about, was falling back in love with the one who gave me all of this in the first place, and see if that can be strong enough for my life, you know?
Sometimes when we remove all that stuff, that's when we have encounters with him that mark us and change us for life. When you look back over those years after you kind of disengaged from music career. Are there any moments along the way where you had an encounter with Jesus that you look back on and like, that was a watershed moment for me?
Totally. I mean, there were a few. I got engaged and married and all of that in that time, and that was really, really important, and that was a total stake in the ground kind of moment where it was like, this is a moment where I have to show up as a whole person, and for my husband, for my future, for the people around me, anybody in my world, they need again, therapist, husband, we're working on feeling whole and knowing Jesus at the center of us and trying to always get back to that, always get back to the inner child, and the one that met Jesus in the first place. And so, but another big one, and this is what kind of I take away from that whole time, is I was singing backgrounds, and I was singing a lot of oohs and ahs and la la la, and not singing any words. And that is what brought me back to the first time I ever made music. The first time I ever was handed this gift was when I was a child, when I couldn't talk. I was singing, and that was the thing that, like, God was like, I needed to take away the words, the polishedness of it all, and I'm just going to let you. And I just remember standing in Madison Square Garden, like huge venues in the middle of the arena. We would do these stages in the round, and singing oohs and ahs and just worshiping because I didn't need anything to be connected here. And so I got to fall back in love with that, with music, and in the way that it was originally given to me. And it was so healing because I get to do that every time. I get to do that when I have a horrible show, when I miss all my notes or I'm sick or whatever it is, I can still connect. That is still the beautiful way that God is connecting with me, and I can still picture that moment. And it's been just a really sweet takeaway for any kind of left turn in life, like I can remember and find that way that God is connecting with me in the sweet, smallness of a possibly big moment.
So singing now has to be such a different experience.
Totally.
I want to ask about that.
Yeah.
But how did you decide to get back into it? Because you stayed out basically of music industry for a time.
Yep, totally. I dipped in and out. I made like some little EPs and put out some little things, but I didn't want it to be my life again. So Andrew Ripp and I, as I mentioned earlier, are in a Bible study together. And another writer named Ethan Hulse, and he wrote literally everything you hear on the radio. He's a huge writer, and it's really hard to be in a small group in Nashville without having a couple of songwriters in your group. And we all, so I was talking about the women's prison ministry. I was talking about these women who were seeing Jesus for the first time or seeing him again, healing, seeing God come alive in their eyes. It was so healing and so beautiful. And so at that small group, they were just like, that's a song. We need to write that song. And so I fought them off for a little bit. And I was like, I'm not a singer, though, so it's fine. And then eventually they're like, okay, well, let's just try. We'll just do whatever. And so I brought in some lyrics from a song I wanted to write to them after 2020 came along. We weren't allowed to go back in the prison. And so I wanted to write a song to send back into them. And so that's what Perfectly Loved was. And so we just kind of kept writing from there. It was not planned. I was super pregnant when all this stuff was happening. I was like not feeling like starting my career again. but that would be the way that God does things sometimes.
He's good that way. So how are you different now?
Yeah.
Than you think about,
I think I'm more okay with coming up here and being like, hey, my skirt is so wrinkly.
Right. I love that. Don't we all love that though? I mean, we do. 100%.
I think I feel more freedom. I feel free, and I feel like I don't need, it's kind of of course, this is going to nod to a song, but our song "Somebody to You" is kind of about this, where it's just like I don't need to do anything to be loved and valued by the one who created me, and like that we can all share that. Like before we wake up in the morning and do anything exciting or impressive, we're already like the apple of his eye. That's so cool, and so being able to do this again and believe that is game changer for my life. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing your story with us.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, guys.
Yep.
The night we recorded this interview, we also got to hear some of Rachel's new music, which I think you will love. If you want to know when and where you can hear new songs or see her on tour, head to RachelLampamusic.com. You can also find her on Instagram. I am so grateful to Rachel for being willing to try out the whole, hey, let's share your life in front of a live audience thing. And it was a ton of fun. We get to share these God stories because of people like you. Thank you for listening, subscribing to the podcast. Thanks for giving kind reviews. If you would like to help this kind of storytelling continue and even grow, then maybe you'd like to support the Wow God Podcast Network. Your $40 monthly gift or a gift of any size, it makes a huge difference. Just click the donate button at wowgod.com. And while you're there, check out some of our other podcasts like Behind Our Smiles. It's a podcast that will encourage your marriage. Or Wow God Stories, which is loaded with great stories that will encourage your faith. As always, I want to say thanks to some of the people who helped make each episode of The Unfolding possible. Lindsay Caparoon, Michael Shermack, our producer and network director, Jason Rachael, and shout out to Ryan Ward and the team at the Vineyard Church for helping us with all things technical for this live recording. We could not have done this without them. The Unfolding is a Wow God production, a ministry of the University of Northwestern St. Paul. Discover more at wowgod.com. We'll be back next week with another page of The Unfolding.